This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We have been waiting a long time for this one. 2 weeks of buildup. Georgia, Florida is finally here. DawgNation invasion of Jacksonville for the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, as you might imagine. Boy, I'm really excited about this one. I think it's going to be a great day for Georgia. I think it's going to be a fun weekend for UGA fans. I expect to be in the center of all of it the entire time. We'll do our part today. For those of you maybe driving down 16, 95, 75, however you get there. For those of you doing that, we'll try to keep you company on the roads. Keep your hands at 10 and 2, of course. And we'll try to talk a lot about the Dogs and Gators. Jeff Sintel later on. A whole lot of fun on today's program. Really glad to have you with us for it. Let's go ahead and get started. As DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is presented by Kroger. More ways to save fresh food, low prices at Kroger.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I have had a great time over the last 48 hours, and really it's the last couple of days when I've noticed this, that it seems like Georgia fans are just frothing at the mouth for Florida on Saturday, and that's exactly the way that I feel that it should be. I have really, really loved the build-up. Now, I'm like all of you. The wait for the game always seems to take a little longer than you want it to. The wait to kind of be in Jacksonville or Amelia Island or St. Simons, wherever y'all are going, for those of you lucky enough to be at the game, that always feels like it takes, a little time. It's like waiting on Christmas when you're a kid, I guess. But while we are waiting on 3:30 for kickoff on Saturday, to watch the way that Georgian fans have kind of been talking, to watch the way that Georgia fans are kind of getting ready for this, my thought is this is exactly the way that a rivalry is supposed to feel. Y'all know I love rivalries. I think that Georgia's lucky to have a lot of good ones. I think Florida's the number one rival that Georgia's supposed to have, and I think that this week the build-up has been exactly as it should have been. Georgia fans ready to go out and just take on a lousy, stinking group of Gators on Saturday and go out there and prove that Georgia's still the bull of the woods in the SEC East. Now, I was kind of thinking, as a way of kind of getting ready for today's show and the fun we're going to have, so why is the build-up especially big this year? Maybe it's not. Maybe I just want it to be. Maybe it's just me who's excited, but one way or another, the sense that I get is, man, this is really ready to go. Georgia fans is really ready to go out there and make an impact on their half of the stadium on Saturday. And for me, it kind of comes down to three reasons. Now, I was also thinking about this before the show started today. Sometimes I have a tendency when I do 3 reasons this, 5 reasons that, I have a tendency to kind of get busy talking and not actually enumerate all the reasons. So let me make sure today I don't do that. I think there are really 3 reasons why Georgia fans are just rock and roll, ready to go for Florida, exactly as they should be. First thing is this. It's a chance to prove the media wrong. Media has really lined up behind Florida here in this game. Now, betting public, as we've been saying, kind of on the side of Georgia, that matters to me. Those are people that put their money where their mouth is. Media folks, for the most part, just spew hot air, and no one ever remembers what anybody else says. But media kind of lining up around Florida, and if beating Florida is not a prize enough of its own to beat Florida and then show the media how wrong they were, Georgia fans always like a dose of that. In fact, somebody sent this to me on Twitter yesterday. I think this is funny. If you're watching on video, of course, you already noticed I've got Gator Hater t-shirt on and my Gator Hater hat on, courtesy of my friends at Onward Reserve. I'll show you this as well. And, of course, if you're listening radio podcast, I'll describe it to you. So much like they do for the NFL games, the CBS Sports Network college football show picks Georgia, Florida. And here across the board, you see all the various picks. You got Brian Jones and Rick Neuheisel, Aaron Taylor, Randy Cross. Gator logo next to every one of their names. So on the CBS Sports Network college football show that you may or may not have ever seen before, all 4 of the people on the show all pick Florida to win the game. Now, for those of you that are big NFL fans, you know that anytime NFL Today or the Fox NFL show, anytime it's across the board logos for the one team, typically it usually works out for the team not picked unanimously. It works out for the other way. We'll see how that works out on Saturday. But that's a pretty good example that somebody sent to me on Twitter of just look across the board here, all these CBS guys picking Florida in this game. The ESPN folks have really not been much different. I played this for you the other day as a reminder of the fact that ESPN's right there with CBS thinking this may be a day for Florida to assert itself. Go back and listen to what Kirk Herbstreit said a couple of weeks ago.
You said the Gators will win the cocktail party. You favored them over Georgia after we saw them lose close at LSU.
I like Florida. If they get healthy on defense, I really like Florida. I just like the way Kyle Trask is playing, and I think I'm not throwing Georgia out. I just think Florida's the team to beat. Georgia's got to get their downfield vertical pass game.
Is that a Coley thing or a wide receiver thing? Or
I can't figure it out. It's not Jake Fromm. I don't think. Jake Fromm's proven he can throw the ball downfield. The receivers haven't. I don't know if it's the OC or the receiver, but they can't get the ball down the field.
So we'll get more into the Georgia offense part of this a little bit later on, but you hear Herb Street say there, I think Florida's the team to beat right now. In a previous ESPN show, he said best one-loss team in the country, ready to go out and prove that there in Jacksonville. So start making a list of all the folks who have kind of given up on Georgia and assume this is now, one of the also-rans of the SEC. Herb Street, the CBS guys, I'm sure you can think of your own examples there as well. Everybody kind of lining up around Florida. Georgia fans get a chance to prove that wrong. So that's reason number one, a chance to prove the media wrong by beating Florida on Saturday. Here's reason number two. And you always see a lot of this time of year, and I like the history of college football. I don't always love the history of Georgia-Florida, though, because we know that, some of that for Georgia has been unfortunate. Long stretch of not doing well in this rivalry. And I saw where Urban Meyer was kind of back at it again within the last week or so. Meyer, I guess, is trying to be a Florida guy again. Now, at one point in time, he faked being sick to get out of Gainesville, but I guess now he's decided he wants to kind of get back in on the Gainesville thing again. And so he was talking about how much fun he had in the 2008 win for Florida over Georgia, and Steve Spurrier's always around talking about that kind of stuff. Chris Lowe wrote this week at ESPN.com about the 95 win for Florida there in Georgia, and for the Gators, they've enjoyed a little bit of history over the last couple of decades, and it always kind of comes up this time of year. Of course, I'm old enough to remember when Georgia was dominating the series back in the 80s when I was a child, and that was really fun, and I think that Georgia fans crave, and one of the things that's made the last 2 years so much fun is that it's been kind of a return to what Georgia fans expect the Georgia-Florida rivalry to be like. And one of the reasons they feel like they have so much at stake in the game on Saturday, and one of the things that kind of ignites the passion for this game is a chance to kind of get some payback on whatever Urban Meyer might have done and whatever Steve Spurrier might have done. That Kirby Smart kind of becomes a nemesis on behalf of Georgia for the blue and orange the same way some of those other guys were for a UGA back in the past. Georgia fans have an appreciation for that. And the history and the payback for Georgia from some of that history is, I think, an important part of this too. And then finally, the third reason why I think that Georgia fans are kind of ready to go and excited about, especially the ones that are lucky enough to travel down to the game, is I think we get a sense that one way or another, the landscape of college football is changing. And hot topic, closely debated, tightly debated in terms of, is Georgia-Florida supposed to remain in Jacksonville? Some people think it's not. Some Georgia fans think it is. But one way or another, the winds of change may blow here at some point in time. And so I get the sense from some of the Georgia fans that I've talked to that while the game is still in Jacksonville, while the cocktail party tradition is preserved, then you better take advantage of that opportunity. You better let it rip and go down there and play your golf and spend some time at the beach and hang out and enjoy a beverage or two and get ready to be raucous and wild in the stadium on Saturday. That you don't know how many more of these kinds of opportunities you're going to get. But I think on Saturday, Georgia fans looking to get ready to enjoy all of that. In fact, as kind of a build-up to that, Kirby Smart even said this week that people think because he's pushed the recruiting part of the home and home so much that maybe he doesn't like Jacksonville. Well, Smart said this week that's not exactly the way that he feels. Here's what Kirby Smart said about that then.
First misnomer there is that I don't want the game in Jacksonville. That's not a case for me. I look at it through, I love playing. That's one of my best memories ever as a player, being able to do that. I think the landscape of college football is such now that your home and homes are so valuable as you go out and try to find other teams to play. When you play these other teams that we're playing out in the future, you got a home and home, so you got one less home game. The team that you used to buy to come play you, you're going to have one less home game. So now with us, every other year, it may be two less. So it makes it tougher in that perspective. But I also think the financial significance of this game and also the historical significance of this game weighed in the factors. And the administration felt like that was the best thing to do. And I'm 100% on board with it. I'm a team player. And I always said once the decision was made. It's a 2-year commitment. We'll continue to see where it's going in college football. So I think as you look across the board, you see more and more kids committing on these official visit weekends where they go to a home game, and they're really important weekends. We just have one less shot at those. That's the toughest thing.
So when you hear Smart say that, hard not to imagine that one day Georgia-Florida may look and feel a little bit different than it is right now. But while it is the way that it is, the cocktail party tradition that so many UGA fans have enjoyed, a chance to go out and appreciate that one more time and get another big win over Florida here in this deal. Let me also take care of two more pieces of business before we transition and talk about something different. Been saying this a lot. I am going to be in the stands tomorrow for the game. I've got Gator Hater t-shirt on today. I got Gator Hater hat on today. Obviously, we're trying to pull out all the stops and do everything we can to give some positive vibes for Georgia, because around here we just believe this is the game for Georgia that matters more than any other. I hope to be able to take over the DawgNation Twitter account tomorrow, some videos, some comments, some things like that, and kind of narrate the experience for the game from the stands. Can't wait to do that. So we'll have more details about that in and around the day tomorrow, so stay tuned. Also, before I kind of change the channel here and switch gears, can I throw out some congratulations here for a moment? Talk about sending out some positive vibes and getting the weekend started on a good note. How about the UGA soccer team? Now, I'm not the world's biggest soccer fan, but how about the job of them last night, getting a 1-0 win? Or what, do we say 1-0? We say 1. We don't. We say 1-0. Okay, I'm not the world's biggest soccer fan, but I'm a big fan of seeing Georgia beat Florida, so I'm going to give a huge shout-out to the soccer team here for a 1-0 win over Florida. First time beating the Gators since 2008. Connor Riley had a pretty good story up about that at DawgNation.com. So always fun to beat Florida, always great to get the weekend started on a high note, and I just get the sense that Georgia fans are ready to go. I'm right there with you all. Can't wait to see you in Jacksonville, or if you're watching the game on television, can't wait to experience it all with you over the course of what I expect to be a very fun weekend. My name is Brandon Adams, and it's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. Good to have you with us live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. And really appreciate Kroger being here with us as a part of this program here today. Let me remind you about something really cool Kroger's got going on right now. They got your pets covered this week. They take care of people. They take care of pets as well. When you spend $45, you're going to save $15 on mix and match pet products, including food and treats for both dogs and cats. Make sure you check that out. And, of course, Kroger going to be a big part of everything DawgNation does for the most part, including DawgNation Invasion tomorrow. Y'all, unbelievable experience. For those of you lucky enough to be a part of it with us, can't wait to share it with you. It's brought to you by our friends at Kroger, Peach Pass, R.S. Andrews, who we do the cool down with on our video side each and every day. Y'all, it's just going to be a big part of the cocktail party. DawgNation Invasion tomorrow. Can't wait to see a bunch of Gator Hater t-shirts around. All of it brought to you by R.S. Andrews, Kroger, and our friends at Peach Pass. All right, we're going to get Jeff Sintel in a minute. Before we do that, let's go around the doghouse here today, brought to you by Meriwether Tharp. And I think it's been kind of interesting to watch the way the perception of this game has changed over the course of the week, not just in terms of who's going to win or lose. Georgia's been a favorite. At one point in time, a 6-point favorite, then down to about 3.5, and then back up to about 6 again. And depending on where you look and when you look with our friends at MyBookie, you're going to see various numbers on that, but also in terms of the overall point total, the expected points. It's been slowly dropping through the week. Some of that may be weather-related. We'll get more to into the weather forecast, the expectations for that a little bit later on in our show here today. But some of this maybe just based on the fact that the perception's out there that Georgia only wants to try to win this game with as low a score as possible, and kind of that, phone booth style street fight situation. That maybe the Kirby Smart-led Georgia offense, not exactly what it should be right now, which means Georgia will be limited in this game. In fact, earlier this week, Kirby Smart faced even more questions, as he has the last few weeks, about the current state of his Georgia offense. Here's what Smart said at the time.
I think we've been able to put a lot of our backs in good situations to be able to win, do things. I think, again, at wideout, it's tough because at wideout we haven't had there's not been a core group that's just been there every game and been able to do it. Cager's the one guy you can make a case has made some plays when he's been available and made some plays on 50-50 balls. We've got to be able to do that because of the way people play us. We're going to have to continue to do that.
So obviously Georgia's going to run it a lot. We all expect that, but still have to throw it some. And Kirby said there is when that happens, more receivers, hopefully with the group that you want to have on the field, not hampered by injury, you have more guys that are able to kind of go out there and win those one-on-one battles. That may be true against any defense, maybe especially the Florida defense because of the style in which Todd Grantham plays. Smart also addressed that this week.
They do a great job of rushing with their four guys and allows them to do more coverage-wise. They've got some alternative pressures and different looks, kind of like we do defensively, where it might look like pressure, but it's not. It's called simulated pressure, but they don't have to do that as much because the 4 guys they got rushing, especially the 2 guys on the edge, are really elite when it comes to pass rush. So they do a really good job of that, and those guys get after the passer. I mean, as good as anybody in the country. It's obvious with their statistics.
It's important to know that the Todd Grantham defense that Smart describes there is a defense that Georgia has handled in each of the last 2 years, with Grantham at Florida a year ago, at Mississippi State the year before that. And obviously, Georgia from a personnel standpoint is a good bit different because of all the receivers that it's lost. But I actually think there's been an overreaction this week in terms of how limited the Georgia offense might be in this game. Now, I've been critical of this group a little bit, and I think justifiably so, over the course of the last couple of weeks. But the chorus that's kind of joined in on that, some of it directed by the media, some of it still within the pocket of DawgNation with the fan base, I think at this point in time has probably been overstated. Let me give you a quick comparison. I told you before that the expected total points have been kind of going down here in this game. At one point in time, 46.5. In some places now, you can find that at like 44.5. The combined score for both these teams, only 44.5 points. By comparison, Ole Miss Auburn, the over-under for that game is 52.5. Did you see the Auburn offense last week? Have you seen the Ole Miss offense in a lot of the games that it's played thus far this year? You really expect fewer points in this game than that? Now, weather completely changes all that a little bit, but if we assume that's not a factor for right now, I think people are actually underrating the Georgia offense in this game. I don't expect Georgia to win this game by scoring 50 points necessarily, but stalling out and hoping to win a field goal game, 13-10, something like that, that's not been the Georgia history in this series the last couple of years, nor in the last couple of matchups against Dan Mullen and Todd Grantham. So file that away, and let's see if the Georgia offense doesn't play a little better on Saturday than some people might think it's able to. It's DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. It's also around the Doghouse here, brought to you by our friends at Meriwether Tharp. And obviously, this is a fun weekend. Everybody's thinking about happy stuff, but if you find yourself dealing with a relationship issue, obviously that's not a happy time for you, and it's the kind of thing that you've tried to put off maybe talking about and being serious about. But if you feel like that you're on the verge of maybe getting a divorce, first of all, I'm so sorry for you, and our certainly prayers go out to you and your family. But here's also the advice that I'll give you. You want an advocate on your side, and your source for Georgia divorce are our friends at Meriwether Tharp. This is the kind of thing where expertise matters. This is the kind of thing where thousands of cases being handled leads to just a level of knowledge that you're not going to get by some fly-by-night company that does this and 1,000 other things. Meriwether Tharp knows the law backwards and forwards when it comes to this. So trust them. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com, theatlantadivorceteam.com. No one's more generous than our friends at Meriwether Tharp in terms of doling out advice and creating a relationship that can put you back on the path to maybe feeling whole once again. All right, it's great to have you here. It's DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. More on Kirby Smart and Dan Mullen a little later on in today's show, but for some recruiting stuff and everything else, let's talk to our buddy Jeff Sentell right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, we will do a lot of Georgia-Florida stuff with Jeff Sentell. Obviously looking forward to having him as a part of DawgNation Invasion this weekend. Of course, our Pella Window post-game show after the game, and I'm sure throughout the weekend of the DawgNation Forum and everything else. Jeff, I hope you're as excited as I am to be on the road to Jacksonville a little bit later on today. Entire DawgNation team kind of going together, almost like a mystery machine type thing. Looking forward to all of that, and glad to have you with us for it and here on DawgNation Daily today as well.
So, Brandon, which one of us is Scooby and which one of us is Shaggy? I mean, Maybe Eddie is going to be Scooby, I guess, and we got to feed him Scooby snacks down the road.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Should be very interesting going through South Georgia, going through Valdosta today.
Yeah, I'm probably the nerdiest member of the DawgNation team, so that might make me like Wilma. Is that her name, the one that wore the glasses? Wilma? That might make me Wilma. I don't know who gets to be Fred, the cool one. I guess you're probably the coolest one, so I'll let you be that.
That's Daphne, sir. Come on. I hope everybody's going to get on his back about it. That is the only thing Brandon's going to get wrong.
Wait, I thought the pretty one was named Daphne. What was her name?
Thelma?
Yeah, the pretty one's Daphne. The one that has the glasses is, I think it's Thelma or Velma or something like that. I don't remember.
That's Velma.
Yeah, I don't quite remember. I think the pretty one was Daphne. Now, I don't think there is a Daphne on our bus, unfortunately. I don't know that any of us would qualify as pretty in that regard, but nonetheless, we'll be rolling down the road a little bit later on. And, Jeff, before I kind of get more into the Georgia-Florida stuff with you, because obviously that's what I want to talk about a lot today, I'm kind of have that on my mind. Let me do one recruiting thing first. Now, maybe I'm just in a good mood, but I thought that the edit that Georgia sent to Noah Sewell was really pretty cool. Now, once again, this is video. You can see it. If it's radio podcast, I'll describe it. But you got the American Samoa flag on one side, the Georgia, kind of G flag on the other, the kind that the cheerleaders bring onto the field every game. He's kind of almost like busting through both of these. They're both kind of, blown in the wind with the smoke behind it. Leader knows the way, goes the way, shows the way that it says. I think that's actually a pretty good use of a social media department right there. I kind of joked yesterday about some of the weird stuff that Florida sent out this week. Give me Noah Sewell paying tribute to his heritage and reminding him that a leader would blaze his own trail and come to Georgia. Give me that kind of artwork more so than some of the weird stuff that I've seen from some of the other schools, Florida included here. I like the Sewell edit. Now, some people told me they didn't think it was quite as cool as I did, but I kind of like it, Jeff. I thought that was a pretty good job for Sewell there. Did you agree?
Well, Brendan, that's one of the, unsung heroes of every football support staff now is those edits that keep the recruits really steeped and really woke about a program. And, Georgia sent out a lot of edits this weekend about Halloween. I'm sure everybody's seen the acts with a lot of Georgia's players. But that was a definitely original edit for Noah Sewell. And if you read DawgNation.com, you'll know what both those flags mean. One of those is for American Samoa, where he moved from with his family to Utah when he was 10 years old, and the other one is that Georgia G. And Brandon, you got me thinking about who's going to be the pretty one on our drive down there. For the rest of the weekend, we're going to call the pretty one the Georgia offensive attack. We're going to call that the good-looking one in the group for DawgNation this weekend.
Yeah, I don't mind that, Jeff. I think that's a pretty good idea. Let me also say this, fair and balanced, to be full disclosure here. So I kind of made fun of Florida yesterday for its Halloween theme.
Shocking.
Yeah, exactly, right? I take the bait on that every single time. I said that I would if somebody had sent me one of those Chucky doll things on Twitter, I would have reported them. It seemed more like a threat to me than a recruiting pitch. And then, admittedly, I did go back and see later on, and I actually wrote about this when I posted the podcast at DawgNation.com yesterday, that Georgia had kind of done the whole axe thing with Joshua Braun and maybe some others as well. Joshua Braun's just the one that I happen to have seen. So, admittedly, fair and balanced here. Georgia got into the Halloween game a little bit, too, yesterday. For some reason, Jeff, I like the Georgia part of this a lot more than I like the Florida edits here. I don't know what that's about, but I guess the Georgia stuff I happen to like just a little bit better.
Okay, Brandon, now I've got to do my due diligence as an objective reporter here. I know it's going to be hard, but I'm going to ask you not to speak as someone clearly objective on this game, but to put yourself in the shoes of a Georgia football fan here. I know that's going to be hard. Might require some De Niro chops, but I want to ask you, do you prefer would you say that the Georgia edits are a little bit more classier than the Florida edit team at this time of the season?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that whole Chucky doll thing that they do is just really dark imagery, and it kind of goes along with a couple years ago they had that tiger skeleton on the field. Back when their rivalry with LSU was especially hot. I think Florida has embraced a lot of really dark imagery, which I just don't really like. I think the Georgia edits for the most part are kind of sleek and classy, and I think it's befitting a program like Georgia as opposed to what I think of Florida.
Well, that's exactly what I thought you would say, man. Hey, how about, did you check out Carson Beck's stat line last night? He had another great game, and Carson Beck is definitely trending upward. Must be all that yoga he does, just like yourself, Brandon. But
yeah,
over his last 5 games, the touchdown to interception ratio is a very Brady-esque 15-1.
Yeah, I saw some of the highlights. I didn't see the overall stat line, but based on the highlights that I saw kind of passed around, it certainly seemed like he was playing pretty well. And that's kind of a nice, bridge for us to talk about Georgia, Florida here for a moment, because you've written about this a lot at DawgNation this week, that, Georgia has impacted the state of Florida in recruiting this year and probably had a negative impact on the Gators because of that. The success the last couple of years gives them a chance to have a better inroad with a guy like Carson Beck, better inroad with a guy like Jalen Carter probably. Warren Brinson, I'm sure they would love to have had, and Georgia gets that. In fact, Brinson may have actually kind of trolled Florida with the way all of that went down, to say nothing of some of these offensive linemen that Georgia have kind of gone out and gotten from that state there. And Kirby said that this week that there's going to be a lot of overlap with these two teams anyway, that guys on one side have been recruited by the other. And the point that I made, Jeff, also is some things in college football are a coincidence. I'm not sure this is. The fact that there are so many instances of this series not really being close. The winner decided by more than 2 touchdowns. To me, that just speaks to the zero-sum nature of Georgia versus Florida, that the school that collects the most recruits gets them at the expense of the other, and therefore the losing team is just going to find itself facing a little bit greater gap. That was true in 2017, 2018. Georgia certainly hopes that's true in 2019 as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, Brandon, to me this doesn't seem like, and I'm just going to speak what I feel here, it doesn't seem like Georgia goes head-to-head against Florida all that much anymore. It seems like Georgia goes into Florida and identifies the elite players it wants, and Florida tries to get in there at the same time. When you think about recruiting rivals these days for Georgia, I think about maybe 2 or 3 programs. I think of Ohio State, I think of Alabama still, and I think of Clemson. Those are the schools that Georgia kind of goes mano a mano, and you got to throw the new Stone Cold Fox on the recruiting scene. That would be LSU in there as well. But those are the schools, by and large, that it seems like Georgia goes up against. And Brandon, I'd be curious to hear your opinion. You know those things on Twitter where everybody says, you know, I'll use a cleaned up phrase for it, but hold my red Solo cup and let me see what I can do. It certainly seemed like in the month of March, April, and May, June especially, where it was almost like the Georgia program was calling its shots with a lot of its recruits, where they were gonna like Jalen Kimber comes to mind, Josh Braun, who would have been Florida's top offensive line target this year. You got Marcus Rosemead, you got Carson Beck, you got Warren Brinson. It seemed to me like for the longest time Georgia was trying to do its talking on the recruiting trail rather than its talking in off-season headlines, which is what Dan Mullen was excelling at.
Yeah, I want to respond to that in a moment. But first, let me tell you about my friends at the Atlanta and North Georgia Building Trades Council. You know, the AENG TBC is dedicated to the work and economic stability of organized construction workers in North America. This is a very important organization for those of you that do this kind of work for a living because they create more work opportunities, living wages, they protect your benefits for all construction workers. You can also earn while you learn with no tuition apprentice training. I'm talking about as much as $100,000 while you're serving your apprenticeship. They also offer employer-paid pension and insurance, and the wages are up to 30% higher than non-union workers. The great news is this isn't just for men. Women also encouraged to apply. Everyone encouraged to reach out. So let me give you a couple ways to do that. Find them online at GeorgiaConstructionCareers.com. That's GeorgiaConstructionCareers.com. Or can I see that phone number one more time for the folks who are listening? 404-584-0005. That's 404-584-0005. So, Jeff, I think it's interesting that you bring up the whole talent thing and the way in which Georgia kind of really beat up on Florida in the early stages of the 2020 recruiting cycle with some of the guys that committed to Georgia and the ways in which they committed to Georgia. But really, when I kind of, spin that forward for the game on Saturday, I think one of the storylines is, does the talent gap still matter? Obviously, Georgia lost a game a couple of weeks ago where it had an even greater talent gap. Florida, South Carolina's got some defensive guys that can certainly play and would play for Georgia, but for the most part, a lot of those Gamecocks were guys that Georgia had passed over. The same thing with Florida here as well. A lot of 3-stars in the field for the Gators, lots of 4s and 5s for Georgia. The talent gap has mattered for Georgia a lot. That's why it's dominated the East the last couple of years. I think one of the subplots underneath the overall larger narrative of who wins and who loses is, does the Georgia talent gap that Kirby's worked so hard to create, does that still matter? Not because I don't think he can out-coach Mullen in a head-to-head situation, but part of the ways in which Smart has out-coached Mullen in the past is how he's deployed the overall better talent. So does the talent gap still exist? That ends up being, and does that talent gap that does exist still matter? That ends up being one of the biggest storylines of this game of all for me.
Yeah, and Brandon, for me, there's a lot of things about there's a lot of I guess it's just worry. That's just the best way to say that. There's a lot of worry about Georgia, Florida, especially with these new pass rushers coming back. Well, except those guys coming back healthy, but except for Greenard, the young man that transferred in from Louisville, a lot of those guys were on the field last year. Florida actually lost 3 of its better defensive linemen off last year's team as well. And that's one of the things I put in the DawgNation forum today is I dug up a copy of Georgia's Florida travel roster for last year's game. And then I compared it to what kind of Georgia will bring this year's game. Now, of course, there's a clear hot-button issue that the wide receivers Georgia brought to Jacksonville last year are a better, more experienced pairing than this year's group. But then again, Georgia really just spread the ball around. I think Holloman had a couple of big touchdown catches. Nobody had more than 75 yards in that game. Fromm threw for 240, but they made those big clutch conversion catches. But by and large, if you look at a lot of Georgia's roster this year compared to last year, it shows to me, like, look at the players that are gone. You see a lot of, dependable Bulldogs, guys like Keon Richardson, Natrez Patrick, Jackson Harris, Jason Stanley. You see a lot of those guys that, were pretty good. Jawan Taylor, let me make sure I get that guy in there as well. But, aside from that wide receiver group, you see Georgia replacing them with bigger, more athletic, more skilled, just more explosive athletes. Especially on the offensive line, most of the key particulars are all there. And there's only about 4 or 5 names. Jonathan Ledbetter would be one. DeAndre Walker would be another one. There's only about 4 or 5 names that actually got down in the trenches and were responsible for either defending the box for Georgia or, basically Georgia's all frontline offensive line personnel are all back, except they're a year bigger, faster, and stronger. You got to think Fromm's made some gains. You got to think Swift has made a lot of gains in their game since a year ago. It just seems like looking at those names outside of the wide receiver group that Georgia is bringing a better roster and a more talented roster to Jacksonville this year than they did last year.
I think that's true, and we'll finish up with this. I've been critical of the Georgia offense. I think a lot of people justifiably have been based on the way that it played against South Carolina. But I also think whether you're talking about angst from fans or you're talking about criticism from the media, we've kind of now overcorrected on this. I talked about that before you joined us here a moment ago. Any good statistician will tell you when you have a really predominant outlier, the best thing to do for your prediction is to throw that outlier out. And I think that's what the South Carolina game was for Georgia. It was a horrible outlier of putrid play, but other than that, the Georgia offense has kind of been okay. I think the Georgia offense is going to at least be okay on Saturday because for now I'm content to throw out the outlier, which is the South Carolina game. Now you can say, well, that's wishful thinking, and maybe on Saturday night I'll end up realizing that, and maybe the Gamecocks game wasn't quite the outlier that I hoped that it would be. But for now, I actually think that the Georgia offense enters this game somewhat undervalued. I don't expect them to score 60 points necessarily, but I don't expect them to sputter for 13 or 14 either. I think the total's too low in this game. I think the expectations of the Georgia offense are too meager for right now. I actually expect this group to play a little bit better than some people think, Fromm included, wide receivers included. We got a few seconds left. How do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, Brandon, I think one point I want to make with all that is, nothing against the beat writer tribe that covers Georgia. They're very hardworking professionals. They're seasoned at what they do. They're definitely getting at the talking points and the angst and trying to bring the worries of the fan base to the players. But when I watch it, it's on the DawgNation YouTube channel. Jake Fromm's press availability on, I believe it was on Wednesday with the Georgia beat crew. Man, I think folks forget. It seemed like they were talking to him like maybe Jake Fromm will be able to put his hands and grip the football the right way across the laces of the football. It's almost like there's a measure here where I understand where all this is coming from, but I think the thing with Fromm is everybody keeps comparing him to the best 2 or 3 or 4 quarterbacks in college football, and everybody's going to have their pointed opinions on that. But by anyone's estimation, Georgia is bringing in a top 4, top 3, top 2 quarterback in the SEC to this football game, who's faced an Alabama defense that's just as good or better than this Florida defense twice. It's faced an Auburn defense that's pretty good and just as good as this Florida defense as well. And that when he was younger in his game and wasn't the player he is now. To me, it just kind of seemed like everybody expects Fromm and the Georgia offense to maybe put together a 1 for 11 for 8 yards like that 1980 Sugar Bowl performance, and then they're just going to pound the ball and run the ball all game with the ground game. I think this is another one of those times in Jake Fromm's career where he always has to step to the line, put 10 toes down, and just excel and blow everybody away and remind everyone that he is one of the best quarterbacks in college football.
Yeah, Jeff, I think that's good stuff, and I think there's, certainly going to be a lot of attention on Fromm on Saturday to see if he does just that. Can't wait to cover it with you this weekend. Can't wait to talk to you about it on the way down to the Florida First Coast here today. Looking forward to being in Jacksonville tonight. DawgNation Invasion tomorrow. I live for this weekend. I love it. and I'm glad to share it with you, Jeff. I look forward to seeing you later on.
All right, guys. Quick reminder, official visit watch. South Georgia's own Zacchaeus Walker is taking his official visit this weekend to Auburn. Next weekend will be Alabama. That's another name to pay in mind for the 2020 class.
Good stuff, Jeff. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger.
See you later.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So Jeff drops a nice little Zacchaeus Walker note there at the end. Walker's one of those guys, if you watch Before the Hedges presented by Kroger during the week, kind of climbing the ranks of that top target list. It seems like Georgia's really identified the remaining defensive lineman it wants. Walker's one of those. Obviously, Jordan Birch out of Columbia, South Carolina is the other big name that's out there right now, and I guess we'll follow these official visits for Walker coming up soon. A lot of times the unofficials are a little bit more telling and predictive than the officials. Guys like taking their officials, and it sounds like Walker's going to enjoy himself the next couple of weekends here. But maybe Georgia's starting to feel like it's in okay shape for Walker as we head towards the finish line of the 2020 class. Let me talk about some other games here for a moment, though. SEC through time, it's our MyBookie best bets. And my friends at MyBookie are a great way to enjoy the action beyond just Georgia, Florida. Get some bets down on some of the other games there as well this weekend. And obviously everybody wants to be a winner. The great thing about MyBookie is they give you a chance to be a winner before your first bet's even placed, before your first bet's even won, because when you sign up, you get a big first deposit bonus. I'm talking about doubling your first deposit, getting up to $1,000. That's what MyBookie can provide, but you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. All one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, DAWG. Find MyBookie online, use the promo code DawgNation, and get yourself a big, big first deposit bonus when you use my friends at MyBookie. By the way, enjoy some in-game NFL wagering with them there as well. All right, let's roll through our MyBookie best bets. We'll also do more of this later on today on Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. Connor's been hot with his picks. Connor Riley, you'll be able to hear him and share his thoughts on these games later on. I'll give you some of my thoughts right now. Let me start Mississippi State and Arkansas. This may seem like two terrible teams and a game not worth paying attention. I do believe there's a clear edge here, though. I think 7.5 points is too many for Mississippi State on the road here in this spot. You know the story for Arkansas. They've lost 13 straight in the SEC, all of them in the Chad Morris tenure. But given the fact they're a big underdog virtually every single week, they've actually done better against the number than you might think. 6-7 against the spread over the course of those 13. Mississippi State was a road favorite a couple of weeks ago at Tennessee. They lost in that spot. Tennessee was easily better than Mississippi State. Why in the world would Mississippi State play better now than they did then, given how bad they've been the last couple of weeks? I think Arkansas plus the 7.5 is a pretty clear play here. I kind of like the Hogs, not necessarily to win the game, but to keep it within the 2-score number the 7.5 requires. Let's talk Auburn-Ole Miss a little bit. I took Auburn last week, and I covered with that number at LSU. However, I don't expect to be quite so easy against Ole Miss on Saturday. This is an Auburn team that gets to exhale now. All its remaining games are at home. They in this spot week before a bye. They've actually not done that well under Gus Malzahn. Failed to cover in 3 of their last 4 games the week before a bye. In this relaxed spot, I think they're kind of in a tough spot here. The Ole Miss defense may be better than you think. 39th according to the SP numbers from Bill Conley. The Auburn offense, you know that it's struggled. They've scored 50-plus 3 times, but in those other games, they failed to score 30. I don't think they score enough to cover 18.5 on Saturday. I like Ole Miss to keep that one a little bit closer. The Vandy, South Carolina game, I don't have a strong play on this. I'm going to lean on the fact that South Carolina under Will Muschamp has been pretty good against the spread. They are 17-12-1 in their last 30 SEC games, but this is the first time they've been a double-digit favorite in SEC play since Muschamp became coach there. Outside the SEC here for a moment, SMU Memphis, another game where I don't have a great play on this one way or another. I think it's a pretty fun game if you're flipping channels during the Georgia game on Saturday. SMU's not been good against Memphis. They're 0-5 straight up and against the spread in their last 5. That doesn't really matter because a lot of that predates Sonny Dykes. A lot of that kind of goes back to the Chad Morris regime. This number opened at 3, moved to 6 pretty quickly, which means somebody thinks they know something about Memphis. The telling game for me here is that Tulane, who's 41st in the Football Outsiders FEI, Memphis beat them 47-17. They also played a close game, beat Memphis 15-10. So they've won a couple different games against quality opponents a couple different ways. For the most part, everything for SMU has been high scoring, kind of overcoming a defense that's given up a lot of points. Like I said, not a strong feel for me in this game, but I will take Memphis there on that, minus the 6 points at home. I think the Sunflower Showdown between Kansas State and Kansas is really fun. Kansas is better than you think. the Kansas State offense comes in ranked 40th in Football Outsiders FEI. Kansas not that far behind at 47. So for Kansas State on the road after beating Oklahoma a week ago, be very careful with the Jayhawks here in Lawrence. Kansas under Les Miles actually covered its last 3 games. I think they keep this one close against Kansas State there as well. This is a pretty good game, I believe. Kansas offense pretty fun to watch. Give me the Jayhawks there. And then finally, the 2 big Pac-12 games, Oregon going to USC, Utah going to Washington. I probably like the Washington side of this the most, but on those 2 games, I think you might take both underdogs outright to win on a money line. Hope for, at worst, a split. Maybe at best, you get them both. That would be my advice on there for entertainment purposes only. But good luck to you this weekend with my friends at MyBookie. Use the promo code DawgNation. Those are our MyBookie best bets. And we'll look a little more closely here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, at the weekend's worth of events going around the cocktail party in just a moment. For now, though, let me kind of get back to the Georgia-Florida matchup here on the field and the coaching match between Dan Mullen and Kirby Smart. And listen, I don't know that Kirby Smart has time to read bulletin board material, has time to kind of soak some of that kind of stuff in, but there has been some of that lately. I've heard coaching mismatch being used to describe Mullen versus Smart. That if it's a close game and it's late, you just know Dan Mullen's going to outcoach Kirby Smart. That's not exactly what Reese Davis said on TV not all that long ago, but boy, when it comes to being impressed with the coaching acumen of Dan Mullen, the guy that the media loves to tout as having done more with less, I think Reese Davis on TV not too long ago, you know him from ESPN's College Game Day, I think he did a pretty good job kind of calcifying exactly the way that a lot of media types feel about the coaching acumen of Mullen. Let's give you a reminder here.
I'm sure that there are play callers in the country who are Dan Mullen's equal, but I'll take him up against anybody. I think there's no one that is clearly better. He has a great sense of timing, whether it's a trick play or setting up a play and so forth. And it's benefited the Gators greatly a couple of times when they couldn't block the opposing offensive or defensive front, especially in that Auburn game.
Can you imagine what what Lincoln Riley or some of these guys may think about when they hear Dan Mullen being described as the best play caller? No one's better than him in college football. I like Reese Davis. I think he's out of his mind with that particular take. However, this week, Kirby Smart was asked. Defensive-minded Smart, offensive-minded Mullen, the battle of wits between these two guys. How much does that matter in this game? And Smart gave a pretty detailed answer on that.
It's a chess match every time you go against somebody. It boils down a lot more to players than it does X's and O's. He always has a very physical football team. They believe and they have a commitment to the run game. They always seem like they have downhill, low center of gravity backs, very similar to what he has now. He had at Mississippi State. Big physical offensive line. He never abandons the run. He's always going to be able to run the ball. He always has a quarterback that can run the ball, especially whether it's short yardage or packages with Emory coming in for him. And he's got as good a wideout group that he's ever had that I can remember, and he's using those guys' skill sets. I mean, he highlights those wideouts he has because he has so many. I mean, I don't know how to better say it than to say that he has a complete offensive package right now with what he has, so he has the ability to use all those guys.
So listen, I mean, obviously, as Kirby said, Mullen has been good at using the guys that he has, and at Florida right now, he's probably got better offensive talent than he's had in the past. But Kirby also said in that same clip you just heard that ultimately the game boils down to the players, a lot more to the players, he said. Not the chess match between Mullen and Smart, but the players. And I talked about this with Jeff Sintel a moment ago. My bet for now, even though Georgia struggled a little bit, my bet for now is that the talent that we thought that Georgia had at the beginning of the season, it still matters more now. I'm not going to be fooled by a black swan event, a loss to South Carolina, kind of a weird, random outlier, at least for now. We may get more data and find out that's not quite as outlierish as Georgia fans hoped that it was. But for right now, that's your black swan. That's the thing that sort of sticks out and kind of doesn't really match the rest of the data set. For now, I'm not going to be fooled by that. For now, I'm going to kind of go back to where we were in June, July, and August. Team with the better talent is Georgia. I believe that Kirby Smart's right. The talent matters more than whatever the media thinks that Mullen is from a play-calling standpoint. That's why I like Georgia to win this game on Saturday. Let's do our Kroger Kickoff. Around here, getting ready for the weekend means leaning on our friends at Kroger, stocking up for whatever party you might be having, whatever birthday party you might be going to, whatever else. Kroger just helps you get ready for all of that. They also help us get ready for the weekend here as well. And for us this weekend, that means cocktail party time. Let's give you a little bit of an update on all this. Of course, Kroger are a part of DawgNation Invasion from 11:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. tomorrow. Then with Dog Walk slated to go around 1:30 or so, we'll be there for the Kroger Kickoff. We'll give you more. I'll tweet some more details about the gate information, all that kind of stuff. But we'll do Dog Walk live on video tomorrow as part of our Kroger Kickoff at 1:30 p.m. Of course, the game itself, 3:30 p.m. Keep your eye on the weather here. Right now, according to what I saw online this morning, 67 degrees for a high. There is a 40% chance of rain. Tough to know exactly how that's going to work out, but for now, there's at least a little bit of a chance of rain in the forecast, so pay attention to that, both for your own enjoyment and for how it impacts the play on the field. We'll keep watching that. Then, of course, after the game, Pella Window postgame show from the field. Will react to everything. What we hope is a victorious night for the Georgia Bulldogs against the Florida Gators. And of course, our Kroger Kickoff is brought to you by our friends at Kroger. Great news here. Kroger is introducing free pickup at all stores right in time for a busy holiday season. They want to take care of your time, give you some of that time back. You can shop the Kroger app, the website, and you can place your order in person and pick it up. It's all with a free pickup. I think this is a great way for those of us who are busy this time of year. Kroger taking good care of you. So check out Kroger.com, the Kroger app, for a lot more on that. All right, y'all. We've reached the finish line. The week is done, at least for us. For those of you getting ready to wrap up your work day, enjoy that. For those of you coming down to Jacksonville or somewhere around the Golden Isles, wherever else, Georgia coast, Amelia Island, hope you have a great time. Hope you enjoy it. These are the serious moments. An unbelievably big game for Georgia. Wouldn't want it any other way than when we got it. A chance to share it here with a great team at DawgNation. You heard from Jeff Sentell a little earlier. Of course, Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, everybody else, Michael Carvell back in our studio. We're all getting ready for a big one on Saturday and looking forward to sharing it with all of you. Hope to see a lot of you around Jacksonville here this weekend. And on Monday, I hope to once again be talking about our Gator Hater Updater. Here's where it sits now. 1,098 days. We expect to still be watching it climb on Monday. I'll share it with you then. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Gator Hater hat is on. Gator Hater t-shirt is worn. We are ready to go, and I hope you are. I'm sure you are. I know you're excited about it. You should be. We are lucky. We had a speaker the other day. I'll be philosophical for like 5 seconds. We had a speaker that came in and spoke to our entire company, not just DawgNation, but our entire company. And he said something effective, hey, every day you should remind yourself to say to yourself, hey, just remember how lucky you got it. And for those of us that are, lucky enough just to be following Georgia, in my case, covering Georgia for a living, this is one of the biggest games that will be played all year long, and I'd love to be able to guarantee a win or something like that. But just being able to be excited about this, looking forward to it. There are 130 teams that play FBS football. Most of them will never sniff any kind of legitimate playoff chance, right? I'm talking about even the Power 5 teams. The majority of them have zero chance of ever making a college football playoff. Georgia gets to play its most hated rival on Saturday with the SEC East, the SEC Championship, the college football playoff, all of those things potentially on the line, certainly gaining in the likelihood of occurring if Georgia wins. So just for a moment, win or lose, stop to consider the fact that by being a fan of Georgia, by living where you live and doing what you do, you get to experience the kind of thing that the average college football fan just does not get. And so this weekend, I find myself, and I know this is like corny and philosophical, I apologize. I find myself grateful even before the game because of how big that it is. And obviously, moods will change depending on the outcome, but the fact that we get to even look forward to something like this is the kind of thing that the average college football fan just will never get to experience. You understand where I'm coming from on that?
2015 was my senior year. It was the last time I thought I'd be in Jacksonville for a while. It was a terrible game. We will never speak of what happened there and the coaching decisions that were made that day. But I was fortunate enough to be brought back with DawgNation last year. Georgia won that game. And I am excited to go into this game again, which I feel very passionately should be played in Jacksonville every year and should remain in Jacksonville every year because it is a special rivalry environment. And, we've said before, we think the clock is sort of ticking on this game being in Jacksonville, whether it be next year or 2021. If you have a chance to go to this game, you're sort of on the fence, sitting on it, should I do this, should I not? I think you should go all in and experience this at least once while it is still in Jacksonville.
I think that's very well said. John Benton asks a good question. He says, assuming we win this on Saturday, what is a realistic number we can get the Gator Hater updater up to? Now, I'm bad at math, so I won't be able to tell you about the total number of days. But, Connor, what John mentions I think is kind of interesting, and you've talked about that this week, that Florida actually stands to lose a lot from its current team on next year's team. It certainly stands to reason. College football is unpredictable. Transfer market maybe makes it even more unpredictable, but it certainly stands to reason that Florida will be less talented in 2020 than it currently is in 2019. Another thing that potentially makes this weekend's game even bigger, as if that were even possible, the fact that, as John I think is kind of alluding to here, is there could be a little bit of a ricochet effect for a win on Saturday. It's the kind of win that has some compound interest that might beget more wins because, hard for Mullen to sell, hey, man, I'm a coach. I can out-coach Kirby. He gets all these players, but, man, I'm going to develop you. I'm going to coach you up. If you lose two straight, and especially if you lose two straight in somewhat convincing fashion, I realize I'm being greedy here for a moment, but if you lose two straight in somewhat convincing fashion, that Mullen pitch doesn't really work quite so well. His own fans, I've said this before, ultimately the thing that's going to do in Dan Mullen at Florida are his own fans, not Gator haters, but his own fans kind of turning against him and souring on him, much the same way that's happened for Gus Malzahn at Auburn. I think that John brings up a fair point. Mathematically, I can't tell you how many more days it goes because I can't add in my head very, very easily. But I will say that a win in 2019 makes a win in 2020 all the more likely, which makes a win in 2021 all the more likely, and then on and on and on it goes.
So if they win tomorrow, when they play next year, I believe it'll be 1,463 days between possible wins, assuming Georgia wins tomorrow, because next year's game is obviously played on October 31st, Halloween, and there's the whole leap day and whatnot. So, and they're going to lose 5 of their top 7 pass catchers from this team. They're going to lose their top running back. They're going to lose a couple of offensive linemen, and they're going to lose all of their best defensive players: Inigo, Grenard, Henderson, and Wilson, David Reese, their middle linebacker as well. It's a lot of attrition to lose, especially for a team that is not reloading and restocking like some of the other elite SEC teams.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming says we're going to be traveling for my daughter's swim meet to Chattanooga, so we're going to be watching from some sports bar. So, Jennifer, here's what I will say. I've been lucky enough to go to a lot of these games, but there have been a lot of years in which I wanted to be there and I couldn't. I've done like sports radio and things like that, and sometimes when you're slated to work on the weekend, it prevents you from being at the game you want to be in. So here's the rule I kind of always follow. It's really 2 rules. When possible, be at the cocktail party. But rule 2 is, when you can't be at the cocktail party, make wherever you are the cocktail party. Now, if you got your kids and you're doing swim meet stuff, that's a little bit more challenging, but make the most of the situation is the point that I'm getting to. If you can be at the cocktail party, you should. If you can't be at the cocktail party, you should make wherever your feet are the cocktail party. That would be my advice there on all of that. Let me go to YouTube for a moment, and we'll get more of your Facebook comments here.
Unless you're under the age of 21.
Yes. Now, under the age of 21, we do not condone that, nor do we vouch that. Something tells me that Jennifer's probably 21, though. Let's do a couple on YouTube here for a moment. Devin Glenn says, and Devin's been confident this week, he says, it's all about matchups. We match up well versus Florida. I don't care what Georgia has done in the past. He's shouting out Jethro Smith on that. But for the most part, I think the comment kind of goes for everybody. I do think the matchup somewhat favor Georgia. I did a radio interview yesterday, and I kind of said something to that effect that, later on, let's say that Georgia plays in the SEC championship. Let's say that Georgia makes the college football playoff. Some of the things that we've wondered about the Georgia offense, I think those questions become a lot more relevant in a team that you have to really keep pace with them. How much Georgia does in the pass game, I think matters later on. I've always believed that was the case. I mean, you go back and listen to the stuff I said during the summer. I said over and over again that Georgia's typical offensive formula would be plenty fine for its regular season games. Of course, I didn't see the South Carolina game coming. Nobody did. But my overall opinion on the Florida game hasn't changed. Georgia just sort of doing what it typically does, that's going to be fine. But we said even before the season began that you're going to have to pick it up against one of these teams that's a little bit more prolific on offense. It's not just about stopping them. It's also to a certain degree about matching them. So we'll get to that come December. But for right now, what Georgia does, I think, is enough against Florida. And Connor, I know you agree with that because I've heard you say it a lot this week.
We were talking pre-show about Jake Fromm and whatnot, and I'm not sure you're going to see a huge day from him tomorrow, but I think Georgia's really tomorrow is the day of days where they're going to rely on their running game, lean on their running game, ask DeAndre Swift to carry them, ask this offensive line to pave the way to victory, just because this is what Georgia does better than anyone. They're first in the SEC in rushing. Florida's run defense, I believe, is 4th or 5th. They're good, but they're certainly not great at this. And then on the other side of the ball, Florida does not run the ball well at all. They are 11th in the SEC in rushing offense. Georgia stops the run. And what we have seen, if you do not run the football well against Georgia, you are not winning this game.
That's exactly right.
I hate to oversimplify it, and yes, Georgia did outrush South Carolina that day, but if you're not running the football in Georgia, and South Carolina still had 140 rushing yards in that game, you're not beating them.
So let's do a thought exercise here for a moment. And I'm not trying to trap you in an answer. I'm honestly curious what you think. If I've got my math correct, last year Fromm threw for 240 and 3 touchdowns against Florida. So why are you seemingly certain it's going to be a great deal less than that on Saturday?
I just don't have a lot of faith in the wide receivers.
Okay.
Cager, he might play, but I don't know what we're going to see out of him. If his shoulder injury is as bad as we think it might be, and it's popping out every time he hits the turf or gets hurt, you wonder what's the point of really even having him out there. Pickens, this is going to be a big spot for him, and his emotions have not always been quote unquote in check, and Florida's going to talk a lot, and they're going to try and get in his head.
Got to be careful. Say this again. Say this. Finish your point in a second, but say that point again because it's a very important thing for Saturday.
Florida is going to try and talk trash to George Pickens.
Yep.
George Pickens has to be very careful tomorrow because they will bait him into doing something dumb. Charlie Warner, I know people, have wanted to see more from him and get more pass attempts. If he's on the field just making sure George has his head screwed on straight, that's more than enough of a contribution to me because he saved Georgia from getting a 15-yard penalty in that Kentucky game via Pickens.
And I've said this before. Whatever, nasty edge that Pickens has, and I think he's got a good one. I mean this complimentary. I think he's got a nasty edge. I want that on that field tomorrow because I think Georgia at its best is given as well as they're getting when it comes to Florida on this. But we see this, if you watch basketball, or especially if you're high school basketball, you see this in high school basketball a lot, where there's always someone charged with, kind of a little bit of a jab to the ribs on the team's best player while the ref's not looking, tugging on a jersey here and there. Just see if you can make somebody mad. That kind of stuff happens in high school basketball all the time. Some of that with Pickens tomorrow. Hey, the scouting report is we can draw him off sides figuratively. We can kind of get him, up in his head a little bit and mad. You got to be careful with that. I want every Georgia player to play right up to the edge of just being out of control. But you can't go past that edge. Like the echo of the whistle, I want you playing to it. But you can't play beyond the whistle, right? I mean, there is a certain perfect zone of the intensity almost reaches a boiling point. The I want you to eat type intensity that almost reaches a boiling point that doesn't quite go over that edge. I think that's really, really important. But you were also making another point about the receivers. You want to finish that?
I think we're going to need to see a lot out of, and we don't really even know at this point, And I've kind of, I don't want to say sold my stock in Dominic Blaylock, but I don't know how much he's going to play in this game, at least on the offensive side of the ball, given that Kearis Jackson is healthy now and Kirby Smart really seems to value what he brings as a blocker, as well as the veteran leadership with Tyler Simmons. But the reality is those guys are just not the explosive options that Blaylock is in the passing game. And I think if you see a lot of Kearis Jackson and a lot of Tyler Simmons, I think that sort of tips what Georgia wants to do in this game.
So Jonathan Snook asking about the Gator Hater T-shirt. He says, where can we get this? Now, first of all, I'd like to shout out myself here for a moment because this is not the DawgNation Invasion Gator Hater T-shirt. It's essentially the same thing. This is actually old school original Gator Hater T-shirt because it's got the DawgNation Daily logo on the sleeve. This was the first. I think this actually qualifies as a vintage T-shirt now, Connor.
How old is it?
16 maybe. 2016?
It's not vintage.
Oh, I think it's vintage. I think it's vintage.
Kids who were freshmen in college are still in college when that shirt came out. That's not vintage.
I think I've got fair game to call this a vintage T-shirt. Dimitri Sullivan on YouTube. Then we'll go back to Facebook again, and then after that, well, we got a little bit more time. Dimitri says it's not that the media has given up on UGA. He says, but hyping up Florida in the media builds up the resume for strength of schedule. It helps the dogs for the committee. Dimitri, I think it's an interesting point. I want to be clear about something because I saw somebody else say this a minute ago too. That what's the media going to say about Georgia after they blow Florida out? That blah 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 blah.
That Florida's a fraud. That you can't spell fraud without UF.
Yeah, I think that's fair because ultimately, I don't think the media is anti-Georgia. You can't say Kirk Herbstreit's anti-Georgia. Last year, he put his reputation on the line to say that Georgia, even after losing to Alabama, should have made the college football playoff. So you can't say that media, Herbstreit included, is necessarily anti-Georgia. They are just down on Georgia. And as someone who gives opinions for a living, I'm not going to be mad at Reese Davis or Kirk Herbstreit or whatever collection of no-names are on the CBS show. I'm not going to be mad at those guys because they are currently down on Georgia. It's their job to give opinions. That's their current opinion. This is not one of those deals where even after Georgia wins, they're still not going to give Georgia credit. I really don't think that's going to be the case whatsoever. If anything, it may swing back too much the other way where it becomes a rat poison thing again, where all of a sudden now it's, we were down on Georgia, but now Georgia's the best team in the SEC again. They're the one team that can play some defense. I mean, it's very easy to see how that yarn might get spun after this game on Saturday. So I am not of the belief that the media is anti-Georgia. I think just a certain pocket is down on Georgia, but that doesn't change the overall narrative, which it will be fun to prove them wrong on Saturday if that's indeed what Georgia does. That's just kind of the nature of sports. We spout off opinions. It's one of the reasons why we reference point spreads, because not only do we want to give our opinions, we want to be as specific as possible, and I think all media people should do that. In fact, I think you should know that you've got a blowhard on your hands when they don't reference any kind of point spread stuff whatsoever. That means they're just speaking in generalities and hoping you'll forget by the time it's time to call somebody into question. So the nature of sports is we give opinions. We're proven right or wrong in a lot of cases quite quickly here. So the media has weighed in. They have a right to cast their ballot. They've cast it for Florida for the most part. And going out there and saying, maybe you made your pick a little too quickly here, that's just part of the fun of college football.
Right, and as someone who's been right 63% of the time since week one when it comes to picking college football games against the number, if Georgia comes out and they play well defensively tomorrow and it's 24-7, 27-6, something along those lines, they're going to say, well, yeah, Florida was out there with a backup quarterback. They're going to quickly shift the narrative to Mullen still doesn't have his guys in there. He's only in his second year. And I think after wins, very rarely does the media and people in general, just I think more because negativity sells, do they praise the winner as sort of they try to pick the carcass of the loser. You saw it last year after the Clemson-Alabama game. I think the big storyline on that wasn't, Clemson dominated that game. It was Alabama got its butt kicked. What's wrong with Nick Saban? Is it over for him? Sort of that sentiment. And if Georgia wins tomorrow, I unless it's like 44-0, which even then they're probably going to say, wow, this Florida team, what a bunch of frauds. There's still going to be quite a few bit of skeptics about Georgia in sort of that national media landscape.
And I'm going to take Facebook comments after this, the only aspect of the Georgia media narrative that I think has been unfair within the last year or so is I think that Georgia unfairly got lumped into the Alabama-Clemson thing of we're tired of these guys, we want to see somebody different. And my thing on that is, I'm going to use we in this case because we cover it. We are there at the games. We've only been doing this for 2 years. How about you not get tired of
right.
all of this yet? Alabama's been on top in the SEC West since about 2008. Clemson's now been in the playoff a few years in a row. But for Kirby Smart and Georgia, they're just kind of getting started. And those of us who've been on this ride with them, we're just kind of getting started. So this whole idea that back during the summer of college football's so boring, Georgia wins the East every year, Alabama wins the West every year, Clemson wins the ACC every year. We're tired of that. We want something new. That's the only part of this that I thought that was kind of an unfair treatment of Georgia. Georgia's just getting started. I can promise that Georgia fans haven't grown tired of winning yet because they've just now kind of gotten a chance to enjoy it.
So to make a neighborhood reference for the third day in a row, I think right now Georgia is renting in that Clemson-Alabama neighborhood, but they haven't been given the loan yet to buy a home in that sort of really nice neighborhood that Alabama and Clemson, and I guess Ohio State, get to live in it. And getting that loan approved is them winning a national title and sort of finally having that cachet to say, hey, we have the proof in the pudding that we are an elite team.
All right, a couple of Facebook comments. Nick Moore says he thinks the first to get 21 on Saturday wins. And that's
agree
obviously
with that.
Boy, I just see more points than this, and maybe I'm just kind of like just kind of coasting into a Jacksonville on good vibes right now. So maybe, but I just see more. I just see more points. I mean, I can make the comparison during the show to like at Auburn, Ole Miss. You really think there's going to be more points scored in Auburn, Ole Miss than Georgia, Florida? Now, rain's a factor here, but I mean, it's just crazy how low the expected total for this game is compared to some of these averages. Grits also ran SEC games this week. I mean, Georgia scored points in this series the last 2 years. Scored points against Todd Grantham the last 2 times they've played. I actually think the recipe for Georgia win, and I don't know. I mean, like I said before, maybe this is all just game day happy talk, but I think the recipe starts to feel like a few more points than people realize.
To whichever commenter made that point, I mean, the last, I believe, 5, basically every time since 2012, the team who gets to 21 first has won this football game.
Yeah. Also,
so I give you facts and you just, yeah.
But also a lot of blowouts, though. I mean, I don't know.
But I mean, that can still be true. The first team to 21, they're up 21-7, and the game sort of gets away from the team that gets behind.
I guess what I'm saying is, you may very well be right. I don't have necessarily a lot of tangible reasons to feel this way other than this feels like a zig when everybody else is zagging kind of game. I mean, y'all, all of us were never right about anything anytime we all believe the same thing. And this idea of, man, Georgia wants to play this game in a phone booth. Georgia's going to try to get a safety and a field goal and see if they can, hold on for a 5-3 win. I think that's been overstated now. I think it started out being true and justifiable. Robert Barnes said this. The last 2 games with the highlights for Georgia have not been good. So there was obviously a justifiable genesis for all this. But at a certain point in time, once we kind of keep heaping the same narrative on top of each other over and over and over again, like layers of sand, at a certain point in time, I think it's kind of gotten to the point of being overstated now. I mean, what is the average number of points scored in SEC play for Kirby dating back to 2017? Whatever that is, that to me is the most likely point total on Saturday.
I mean, that's just playing the law of averages, yeah.
Right, but Nassim Taleb wrote about Black Swans. I mean, this idea of we all have this South Carolina game in our mind of, the last time we saw Georgia in a non-rainy spot, now it may rain on Saturday, but in a non-rainy spot, it's this unmitigated disaster, and therefore the most recent thing that I saw is the truest thing available. That's not what the math guys will tell you to base your opinion on.
I would say they also scored 23 points against Notre Dame as well.
That's true. No, that's true. I can't argue with that.
Only 30 against Vanderbilt.
I can't argue with that. So don't take my opinion to the bank necessarily.
Well, yeah, I mean, have you seen your picks record?
Listen, 3 straight winning weeks. I'm not here to talk about the past. 3 straight winning weeks. Ty Snellgrove says, I'm thinking the weakness in the middle of the Florida defensive front is going to help us with run game, pass game, less pressure and Fromm. What are your thoughts on that? So, Ty, I think that's a pretty good point. I also take some solace in the fact that Connor, I said this to John Stinchcomb in one of our shows this week. I always like it when people answer questions quickly because it leads me to believe they really believe what they're saying. Connor pretty quickly the other day said that he didn't think that Grenard and Zuniga were going to be completely healthy. So if they're on the field but limited, I think that works out to Georgia's effect there as well. But Ty's probably right that, Georgia is not going to stop attacking the middle of the defense, and for Florida, that's probably not quite as strong as what you think the edges might be able to be. I do take a lot of comfort in the fact they gave up rushing yards to LSU, a team that this year has not really ran it all that great against other opponents.
Gave up 270 to South Carolina.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Tavian Feaster had a huge game. Yeah, that's a good point as well. Yeah, that's a really good point. So, yeah, I'm even happier than I was before. Look at that. That's how quickly things can go. Cody Allen Dixon, good question. DeAndre Swift over 150 rushing yards on Saturday. That'd be fun.
I'm going to take the over because I think Georgia's going to run the ball a lot in this game and sort of lean on him. Now, granted, I said he was going to have 200 against Notre Dame, and that sort of backfired. But, he had 179, I believe, against Kentucky. He had 100 in this game a season ago. I think just sort of the way I tend to believe this game is going to be played for Georgia, I think it involves a healthy dose of DeAndre Swift.
Who's the second leading rusher on Saturday?
Harrion.
Yeah, I think so, probably too. I do think it's a DeAndre Swift game. I think that's what we've seen. John Stinchcomb called him the man after the Notre Dame game, that when Georgia really needs something, they're going to trust Swift there in that spot. And by the way, given another one of these, I want to say nasty edge guys because it makes it sound like I'm criticizing him. But DeAndre Swift kind of has that Philadelphia prize fighter thing to me. He just looks like he's got a little bit of,
He looks a lot better than Rocky Balboa.
Yeah, I would say that in a real fight, I'd probably take DeAndre over Rocky Balboa, and I'd take Darren over both of them. But that thing, man, he's got that. And so, I'm reminded of Noshawn Marino in the 2007 game. My memory of that is maybe it's slightly different, but before the celebration, before everything else, I mean, didn't Georgia just give him the ball like over and over again, just one play right after the other? And Marino, who was also kind of that kind of guy, he had that sort of northeastern toughness to him. He's from New Jersey. DeAndre's from right down the road in Philadelphia. If Georgia gets that ball first on Saturday, I wouldn't mind seeing the same thing. Just feed DeAndre, let him set the tone for the day. I think he's been the most effective spokesman for this team now for a couple of weeks, maybe even more effective than Smart. I think he's been a very effective spokesman for this team, and do some talking on the field tomorrow to go along with that, as he has been doing. I like that.
Higher total on Saturday. Brian Harry in rushing yards. Oh, Georgia's leading wide receiver receiving yards.
Yeah, see, I'm not quite I'm going to say a receiver somewhere has a big game on Saturday, and I guess I'm hopeful if we think that Cager is a little bit like Grenard and Zuniga on the field but not 100% effective. I hope the presence of him causes somebody else to get open. I mean, I do trust Pickens here in this spot. I still like the idea of Dominic Blaylock playing. When they've thrown the ball to him, he's caught it. To say nothing of what I think that Demetrius Robertson can do here. So I'll take a receiver doing something tomorrow to really contribute to this win. Charlie B says we need to see more of Zeus. I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow. I just don't.
I mean, Notre Dame game didn't have a lot of carries. I didn't have a single carry. Kentucky game, only one carry. I think the only reason we saw him get a good bit of workload against South Carolina is because Brian Harrion didn't play in that game. In these big games that Georgia sort of has to win and faces a tough proposition, Kirby shortens the rotation. That's why we haven't seen a lot of Dominic Blaylock recently, and that's why I don't think we're going to see a lot of Zamir White on Saturday.
We'll get ready to wrap up after this. We'll go back to YouTube again here for just a moment, too. John Arena says throwing the ball to DeAndre Swift. Swift obviously entered the gears. Georgia's leading returning guy in terms of receiving yards. Is tomorrow a day to throw to Swift?
Probably. I think you maybe try and take advantage of an aggressive Todd Grantham defense that way. I think maybe tomorrow might finally be the day James Cook gets involved, but Groundhog's more likely to see a shadow than that. So who knows?
What do you think Georgia's in? I don't want to call it 21 personnel because Cook won't really be lined up as a running back. Do you think they have two backs on the field more frequently or two tight ends in the field more frequently? I'm going to count the 6 offensive linemen as that. Yeah, you're probably right about that. Harry Lloyd says they're not going to be able to stop the run, but we still need to attempt balance. And Harry, I think that's pretty well said all the way around. YouTube to wrap us up on what has been a fun week. What else? Let's see what we got here. Jonathan Snook says that Zeus might be returning kicks. We've seen him on kickoff return a couple times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Green Soldier says, do we see the infamous slant route this weekend? Oh, you remember that in 2017 when Swift ran over Chauncey Gardner? Let me get the rest of Green Soldier's comment here. Perhaps a nice wheel route thrown in there for good measure. I think he's probably mentioning the fact that it's not been as present for the Georgia offense this year, but after Chauncey Gardner said what he said in 2017, can't help but remember DeAndre Swift kind of making a pay there late in the game for that. Don't mind that at all. Scott Harris says could really use a special teams big play. I do think special teams is going to be pretty good or pretty important on Saturday. Scott, I'll also reference what Smart has said about Mullen, that from a strategic standpoint, Mullen approaches special teams much the same way Smart does. Kirby has said lots of starters play special teams for Florida, which is something worth paying attention to there. Nathan Morris says 35-14 Georgia. I like the sounds of that. Chime Dog says, he says the stuff that we see, can't see it having an impact on the team. Yeah, for the most part, I think it's probably true. Chad Cahill throwing out some hearts. Yeah, hearts all around. Good vibes among Georgia fans here this weekend. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Huge thanks to all of you. By the way, AJC.com for your Atlanta news now. Of course, big weekend coming up. You can kind of follow along with all of what's going to be happening here in the Atlanta area here this weekend. Also, a lot of fun stuff and maybe some new cameras coming to Atlanta kind of help with the crime fighting deal here. Keep an eye in the sky about what's going on. You can check out that story at AJC.com too. Also, huge weekend previews I told you about yesterday. So it's AJC.com for Atlanta News Now. You can stay up to date on all of that with our friends at the AJC. And of course, huge thanks to R.S. Andrews, making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. We trust them to do all that. Last night, even I was cold. I've said before that my family's like super cold-natured. I'm hot-natured. Last night, even I had to turn on the heat. So if it's gotten cold enough where even you got to turn on the heat, it means you want to make sure it's ready to go for the winter to come, because cold now means even colder later. Make sure your furnace is ready to work and make sure it's safe for you and your family. Get that mega safety check. It's just $99. It's available at rsandrews.com. All the different various pieces and wires and rods and all that kind of stuff that make a heating system work, which I know nothing about. They are experts. They can do it for you. It's rsandrews.com. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the game. I'll be back on Monday. Eddie's going to be right here on Monday. Gator Hater not going to go out of style. Let's do it, y'all. See you then. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.